Hello, everybody, and welcome to some Strixhaven draft analysis. Today I'm going to be building some deck skeletons, but before I do, and before I even explain what that means, I would like to remind you that if you do enjoy this video, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your questions, thoughts, or feedback. And if you would like to gain access to my card-by-card grade spreadsheet for Strixhaven, check out the Patreon at patreon.com/NicolaiBolas and support my content. But what is a deck skeleton? That's basically where you go through the cards and you think, what's a reasonable expectation of cards that I could get for my deck? And then you kind of try to visualize, well, what cards seem to be lacking. So maybe there's a set where you start going through and you give yourself like a certain budget of like how many of the commons you can get. Like usually it's like one or two of each common. And you're like, well, it looks like there's not that many 2-drops, so maybe building an aggro deck is going to be tough, or prioritizing the 2-drops is important. So I'm going to be doing something like that. I have this cool little sandbox thing that lets me visualize it. All the cards will pop up here once I've added them in. But we're going to be starting off with the Lorehold Guild, which is white-red. So we are going to be sorting. I sorted it badly the first time. So colors white and red, formats, sets of Strixhaven, and then commons or uncommons, and it has to be cards and boosters, so that way we don't get random cards from commander sets. Oh, I messed it up. No, I messed it up. No. Not exactly the... my bad. White or red at most these colors. That way it'll be white cards or red cards. Perfect. So it's going to miss out on some of the hybrid cards, just because there's some like hybrid mana cards that you could technically play in your white-red deck. But this should get most of them. So we're going to start by sorting by... CMC should be nice here, I think. So there's the lands here, of course. Lorehold Campus. So let's just add a Lorehold Campus. And then I'll show you what this looks like. So basically it looks like that. And then you'll be able to see the cards on a curve or something like that. So we're adding a Lorehold Campus, because let's just assume that we can get one of those. Going through the 1-drops. I think we're going to try and build multiple decks for each one. Maybe see if there's an aggro deck in the color combination, and maybe if there is a controlling build for the deck. But I'm going to start off with Lorehold Control, because it seems like a pretty interesting thing to attempt. So that sort of deck's not going to want Detention Vortex. It's probably not really in for Academic Dispute as much, or Luminancer. It might want an Excavated Wall, depending on if there's some synergies with that. So we're going to add that to the deck. Maybe it'll want that as a control card. Not really a Guiding Voice deck or a Hall Monitor deck. Make Your Mark. I feel like this card might just be generically good for triggering Magecraft stuff, but we might just explore it more in the more controlling shells, because this one might not be getting into combat as much. It's basically a 1-mana 3/2 if you can put it onto something that dies, but that's harder to do, and it does work with Magecraft pretty well. Lorehold Control won't be interested in Star Pupil. Stonebinder's Familiar could be a nice like growing threat. But you don't really want your 1-mana 1/1 in your control deck, because by the time you get to the late game, it's not going to do much. So you'd rather have it in the early game and have it grow from there, I think. Team Pennant could be a nice like control finisher. Buff up your like spirit tokens. Zephyr Boots. Guardian could go well, so let's try 1 Guardian. Typically not a powerful card, so you might not want to play it super often, but given that we're just trying to experiment here, and we're seeing which 2-drops there are. So Beaming Defiance, not really a control card. Blood Age General. Attacking Spirits get +1/+0 until end of turn. So that's, again, it's like a 2-mana 2/2 in a controlling deck. Campus Guide is more for splashing, so not really this deck. Eager First Year, more of an attacking card. There's not a ton of great defensive bodies. Sciences could be a lesson that is wanted for sure to try and get more towards the late game. But we wouldn't main deck that card. Maybe Illustrious Historian's a card that's the perfect thing for this deck, so maybe you want 2 of that. Seems like a pretty good card for a control deck. It's a 2/1 that can block early and do stuff late. Apprentice, not super key for a controlling deck. It is nice if you get into a board stall, but we're trying to win the late game anyway. Lorehold Excavation could be nice, though. Like if control is good for the Lorehold deck, then maybe this would be good. You can gain some life, deal some damage, then you have a nice late game engine of so once you fueled your graveyard, you can start making 3/2s, which could be nice. 1 times Rip Apart, maybe hard to get the uncommons, but That seems like a good card for the deck. Maybe some removal. Hello, Panzik. Symbology is okay. We'll just assume that you can't always get every uncommon, so we'll just skip some of the uncommons. This doesn't seem like a really lore hold control card. Spell Satchel doesn't seem like a lore hold control card. Stonerise Spirit. You can exile cards to give things flying. That's not super aggressive. I mean, that is more aggressive than controlling, which we're looking for control. Again, more aggressive. Thrilling Discovery could be a fine card. So we're still going through 2-drops here. Orator is not super great for what we're trying to do. So let's just take a brief check-in at the deck. So looking at the 2-drops that we have access to for our lore hold control deck that's more focused on being defensive than aggressive, there's really not much. There's Ageless Guardian, there is Historian, there's a couple of other 2/2s that are like better at attacking than defending. I think Historian's pretty key for if you're trying to defend. Excavation's not doing much. Rip Apart's just removal. Discovery. Excavated Wall could be pretty good because then you go Excavated Wall into Thrilling Discovery and you start filling your graveyard right away. But looking at this, it seems reasonable to get these cards, especially the 1/4. Nobody else wants it. Expel could be a card that this deck wants and no other deck wants. So let's just say you can get 2 times Expel, because nobody else really wants that. Heated Debate, maybe you can get your hands on 1 Heated Debate. It's a good removal spell. Igneous Inspiration's a good card. What's this forecast card? This is a deck skeleton. So you basically, the way I'm doing it at least is I'm building a deck that feels like reasonable to get based on when you would have to pick the cards to get them, and then seeing whether or not the deck feels like it's lacking anything or which cards you may have to prioritize differently. So I'm basically going up the curve for the Lorehold Guild and seeing if there is a potential control deck that uses cards that are reasonable to acquire. So for example, looking at this deck, you don't have to prioritize Excavated Wall. Nobody else wants it, I don't think. Similarly, Ageless Guarding, not a super high priority for other decks. Maybe you can get that a little bit later. If you invest your early picks in like a Rip Apart and a Heated Debate, maybe you can still take advantage of getting these late Lorehold Excavations, late Thrilling Discoveries, late Expels, cards that nobody else really wants, but that you can benefit from. So this is kind of what you can get the sense of. Like if there's a bunch of, if you're trying to build a deck skeleton and you realize that the deck only works if you're getting all of the cards that you need for the deck in the first 3 picks, the deck kind of falls apart. But it looks like this deck at least is pretty reasonable to get. Like, let's just imagine that maybe you can play 2 Ageless Guardians because nobody else wants the card. And so you're just trying to gum up the ground with a couple of 1/4s. You have your 0/4 wall here that maybe you build up. I'm just going to start with 1 copy of these things, and then we can determine from later on how much we want to add to them. But these are the cards that I feel like you can maybe play at, that would be at a decent spot here. So like Expel is not a card other decks want. If you're playing an aggressive black-white deck, you don't want Expel really. If you're playing an aggressive red-white deck, you don't really want it. So maybe red-white control or black-white control are the only decks that want Expel. So you can get it 7th pick, even though it's a really good card in your deck. And that's kind of what we're figuring out here. Letter of Acceptance, it's probably not a splashing deck. Pilgrim of Ages seems quite good here. This seems like a great Pilgrim of Ages deck.
Thank you for all your work and the new interactive stuff.
I'm so glad you're enjoying it, Harmless2689. Thank you for the support. That's very kind of you. So, back to the thing. But yeah, I appreciate you. Thanks for sharing the time. 3 months. That's awesome. Lorehold Pledge Mage, not really a card for your defensive deck because it's a 2/2. I guess 2/2 first strike is decent on defense. Oh, thanks for the raid, Zach. I appreciate it. We're doing some deck skeletons so far, starting off with Lorehold Control. Pilgrim of Ages could not be found. Of the Ages, right. Just seeing how the deck maybe looks. Pledge Mage is probably fine on defense. Hard to attack into a 2/2. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, maybe you'll play a Pledge Mage. Just a fine card. Good first strike is good on defense. Reduce to memory, maybe not the best. I think Spirit Summoning is a good card for this sort of deck just because it gives your learn stuff a good target. Reflective Golem. Reflective Golem works really well with the Make Your Mark card because you can target your opponent's creature with the copy, I think. So how does that exactly work? You would go cast it that targets Reflective Golem, you may pay 2, and you do copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. So if you get into combat with your Reflective Golem, let's just say it attacks into a 3/3, they block, you cast your Make Your Mark, target your Golem and your opponent's creature, and then when that creature dies, you get a 3/2. So when your opponent's creature dies and when your creature dies, you get a 3/2 for both of them. So that's pretty neat. Pretty good stuff there. I don't know if we're going to count on doing that in our defensive deck, but that's just a good combo to be aware of. Let's just assume you can get 1 Spirit Summoning. That card's really good for your Lorehold deck. Yeah, I agree that you want a lot of Spirit Summonings. I'm going to have to figure out how to put them into the sideboard. So let's see. 1 second. Spirit Summoning. Oh. No. Okay, well, we'll just assume that we can put that into the sideboard later. But yeah, getting some Spirit Summonings for the sideboard seems really important. Start from scratch is nice. Stonebound Mentor. Let's just assume you can get one of those. Let's just say 1 time Stonebound. Even though that card's good for the aggressive variants of it, you'll still be able to get some of these uncommons, hopefully. Tome Shredder. This is a fine defensive option. It having haste means you probably want to be attacking, but it's one of the best ways to get cards out of your graveyard. So let's add 1. The classic glut of 3-drops that you tend to get in these sorts of decks. Biblioplex. Combat Professor's still a good card in this deck, I think, because it's a flyer that can still like be defensive as a 2/3 body, so probably a good card still. Though not as necessary as it will be in an aggressive version of it. Dueling Coach, not as good because there's not as many synergies. Fuming Effigy, a 4/3 doesn't block as well. Pillar Drop Warden could be okay. Reconstruct History is like only going to be wanted in this deck, so you probably can get this if it's opened. Artifact, Enchantment, Instant, Sorcery. Let's just check it out. We'll add it to the deck to see how it would play out. Reconstruct History. Maybe you want Pillar Drop Warden. Seems like this could be the best home for it. Nobody else wants it. Okay, Stormkill Narnis, not really for this deck. Ardent Dusk Speaker, is that a card for this deck? Blue-red wants Pillar Drop, that makes sense. Because once you've cast your big spell, you want to get it back and cast it again. Yeah, I guess you're gonna have to fight over Pillar Drop Warden a little bit. Maybe if not fight over it, still doesn't seem like a high pick. This card seems nice. It triggers a lot of things for your deck. Ardent Dusk Speaker, but maybe you can't attack as well because you're trying to be defensive. We'll just put Quintorius in here to see how that works out. We'll put in a Pillar Drop Rescuer. Put in 1 copy of the Pigment Storm. Even though everyone's going to want that card, it is a 5-drop. Relic Sloth, Vigilance and Menace. Maybe we could play Explosive Welcome as a top-end card. Maybe we can get a Cogwork Archivist so we don't deck. I don't think that's going to be a huge problem. Returned Past Caller. Okay, so this is the initial deck that we've kind of gone through, found all the cards that might have a home here. or like be like cards that you can get that other people don't want as much. So looking at this, it seems that, yeah, Quintorius does seem like a card to first pick. Quintorius seems like the only real big payoff for cards leaving your graveyard. This card lets you scry one. This card lets you facilitate it. But there's not like a ton of stuff that's like, when this card leaves your graveyard, do X. So this is how many cards? 23 cards exactly. I'm just going to zoom out so I can see the curve more fully. So I can't really read the cards at this distance, but I will say that it looks like 2-drops are a little bit weak. You've got some top end stuff here. But after looking at the full cards, there are some control elements, but you don't need to be like focused in on any one element. I think if this deck is going to perform, let's zoom back in a little bit. It looks like 3-drops, pretty dime a dozen. There's a lot of good 3-drops. This is more of a sideboard card. Stonebinder's Familiar. Is that the 2-mana 1/2? See, the 2-mana 1/2 doesn't seem as good. So like one of the things that I'm noticing with this deck, as I was just adding cards to it, let's just zoom back in, is there's not stuff that rewards you for getting cards like out of your graveyard other than like using them to make 3/2 tokens. There's also a little bit of anti-synergy with a 1/1 that grows. I guess Stonebinder's Familiar, but I don't like that card in this sort of deck because if you have it in your opening hand, it takes a while to set up your engines to get it going, and then it starts out so small that it's not going to be able to do much. So I don't think that card's very good if you don't care about a 1/1 early in the game, which this deck certainly doesn't. It looks like the control version of this deck maybe won't be as effective. There's also not a ton of learn cards that I have highlighted here. So Spirit Summoning, you might not need to prioritize it as much because you might not be able to learn as much. But it looks like Rise of Exodus. Oh yeah, Rise of Exodus. That's a good card to think about. Yeah, because the way I sorted it didn't account for the hybrid cards. Rise of Exodus could be a good learn card. That is a good point. I can just search up Rise of Exodus so people know what I'm talking about. It's just like nice removal spell. 6-mana exile creature, and then you get to learn. So let's add Rise of Exodus. 5-mana 4/4 Vigilance Menace is not trash, I don't think. I don't think it's a bad card or anything. I just didn't add every single card that you could possibly play into the deck. Just looking at it, so Quintorius is like the big payoff. So if you get Quintorius, you're going to want to be able to exile cards from your graveyard with things like Tome Shredder, things like Pilgrim of Ages can come back from the graveyard, things like Pillar Drop Rescuer can bring things back. Rise of Exodus can exile things or turn thing. This thing can make it leave a graveyard. But other than Quintorius, there aren't a ton of payoffs for cards leaving the graveyard. So it's important to not get hyped up on the fact that Quintorius has that ability, when in reality there's a lot of cards that don't care about that. So let's just do some quick reconstruction of this and be like, okay, so since we don't really care about cards leaving the graveyard as much, let's just get rid of the Tome Shredder. Like Stonebound Mentor Scrying, it's nice, but it doesn't like get a counter or anything. And let's just say that we're not building the like self-mill, try to deck ourselves version. We give ourselves a couple of Ageless Guardians maybe. This deck's going to really struggle to win the game, it feels like, if it's not just casting a massive thing like that. There aren't a ton of great 2-drops for the deck. Historian could be a really good one as just a way to get some trading value, and then you'll get to the late game and be able to get a 3/2. Reconstruct history. Are there artifacts that you want to play? Almost certainly those 2 artifacts that I just cut could be good with this version of the deck. Enchantments, there's not really enchantments. Instants and sorceries you can probably get. But 4 mana to get back an instant and a sorcery is not that good, so you only really want Reconstruct history if you're playing the 1 mana 0/4 and then like the 4/5 for 6 mana. So Reconstruct doesn't seem that good to me based on looking at these. These are the sorts of things that you're trying to get out of doing a deck build like this. Expel seems like it could be good in a controlling version. Could be a way to get an advantage, but I don't think you can build the controlling version without Quintorius. That's what I'm kind of taking away from this, because this is your late game card. This is your, I'm going to start making 3/2s for doing random stuff, like bring back my Pilgrim, getting a 3/2, and like bring back an instant, getting a 3/2, bring back a card, getting a 3/2. And other than, without Quintorius, I don't think you want to go to all the trouble of building a control version of the deck. That's what I'm getting, or maybe some rare. If you have a mythic or rare that really rewards you for it, by all means, but without Quintorius, I don't think the control deck is viable here. So you don't really want to start prioritizing the control cards until you have Quintorius, and that's pretty good to know. I'm sure there's an aggressive version of this sort of deck as well, but we're going to... I did copy that for a reason. We're going to look at one of the other guilds. Let's look at Blue-Green, or Quandrix as it is known. I guess one of the schools. Sorted by CMC. So let's start off by adding a Quandrix campus. Actually, I guess it makes things harder to tell if you have a land, but you can probably get a Quandrix campus. So Quandrix, initially, my thought is it's a ramp deck that wants to get to a lot of mana. I don't know if there's an aggressive version of it hidden somewhere, but we'll find that out eventually if we're looking at the cards closely enough. Symmetry Sage, probably not what you're interested in. I don't know where Symmetry Sage fits. It seems like a powerful card, but it's tough to use, and I'm not a huge fan of it in general. Team Pennant seems really good for Quandrix. It could also be good in Lorehold, but Lorehold has less tokens than you'd think, I think. So Team Pennant could be a really good Quandrix card, so we'll add a Team Pennant, because that seems like a reason to draft Quandrix, maybe, if you're going to have some massive fractals. Zephyr Boots could also be pretty nice in this deck, but we'll just assume you can't get Zephyr Boots and Team Pennant. And you probably don't need both effects anyway. You kind of have one evasive, like giving trample to your big fractals or give them flying. You don't need really both. Bayou Groff does not seem as good in Quandrix. Seems a little bit weaker in Quandrix because you don't have like a 1-drop to sacrifice like you would in Black-Green or Witherbloom. Big play, you can get counters, but you're not really a combat trick deck if you are playing like a ramp deck. You want 2-drops that can kind of defend you. Campus Guide is more of a fixing card. Arcane Subtraction is more of a combat trickish card. Burog Befuddler, you might need a copy of it just so you don't die in the early game. Decent blocker, but we're hoping to do better, I think. Curate, not really what this deck is trying to do, I don't think. Decisive Denial. That's a pretty good card in the set. Decisive Denial could be a type of card that makes you want to play Quandrix. I think Burog is better if you're trying to attack them early in the game, because that way you can maybe get value out of the -1/-0, otherwise it's a 2-mana 2/1, which is bad. Devouring Tendrils, another good fight spell. Let's just assume you don't get to have both of these. You only get one of them, because you don't get to have access to every uncommon, so we'll just put Decisive Denial, but Devouring Tendrils is another similar effect. But Witherbloom's going to be fighting you for this one too, so it's harder to get. Emergent Sequence, pretty good card for the deck. We'll add one of those. Just a good card in general, though. Fractal Summoning, you're going to want a copy of that in the sideboard probably for the late game. You have a couple of learned cards. But it is not a card that's going in your main deck. It's got some pretty big fractals, I think. Pseudonym. I think that you can make some pretty big fractals. It's got like the 6-mana 6/6. It's got access to Bayou Griff if you need a 5-mana 5/4. Needle Thorn Drake. You can probably get a Needle Thorn Drake. It's a great defensive body. Overgrown Arch is really good. You're going to be fighting over that with Witherbloom because Witherbloom really wants that card. Quandrix Apprentice is really one of the reasons to draft this sort of deck, I think, because the deck rewards you for getting a lot of lands into play, and this like makes sure that you hit lands relatively frequently if you have some 2-drops and stuff. Reckless Amplimancer is a fine 2-drop. Can kind of do well if you have a lot of lands in play. Not really a resculpt deck. Scurrid Colony, again, also can do good work. So if you're paying attention for the differences between this deck and the last deck that we looked at, just look at how many 2-drops that last deck had. It had the 2-mana 1/4 in white, which is not great. And it had the 2-mana 2/1 in red that could then exile itself. This deck has a lot more 2-drops that fit with its game plan of going to the late game. So red-white, the 2-drops that it has oftentimes want to be attacking, and so I didn't really add those to the pool because you don't really want to play random 2-mana 2/2s with no abilities in your deck because those are not super powerful. This one has a couple that are better in the early game, like the Befuddler, and maybe the Groff is more of a synergy card for aggro. But in the vast majority of cases, this 2-drop Emergent Sequence, good for the late game decks. Good for the late game decks because Death Touch helps you get there. Good for the late game because it helps you hit land drops. Good for the late game because it gains you life. Good for the late game because it's got a great ability for the late game. Good for the late game because when you get 8 lands, it becomes a real threat. Soothsayer Adept, another card that I think you'll want 1 copy of. Let's hope that it doesn't screw me by not putting Strixhaven after all of these cards. It didn't. Yay. Hooray. But look at all these 2-drops that you gain access to. I guess that this thing's not really a 2-drop, but I wanted to add it to the list regardless. And this is just, in Quandrix, it looks like you're not going to have to worry about getting 2-drops because there's so many that are good. Like, having to play, you'd probably only rather have 1 Soothsayer Adept, but having a couple of these is probably not the end of the world. Scurrid Colony, these cards are all fairly good in the early game and decent in the late game as well. And it looks like Quandrix gains a lot of access to them. You're still not a Spell Satchel deck, really, I don't think. But these are the sorts of things you can pick up. And that's not even including Zimone, which we're obviously going to put in because why not? But Zimone's another 2-drop you gain access to. Look at all the 2-drops that you get in Quandrix. Quandrix is not going to have to worry about getting 2-drops because there's so many of them. And there's also ones that other decks aren't really going to want. There's multiples at common. There's Scurrid Colonies at common. I'll just save it so you can see the pictures for everyone who's not as memorized of the cards. There's common, common, common. Then there's 4 common 2-drops that you're like actively happy to get. And then there's like 4 uncommon 2-drops that are also pretty good. And they all kind of work with that late game theme. So keep that in mind when you're drafting your Quandrix deck, that you don't need to prioritize 2-drops as much because there's a lot of them that are on theme. Whereas if you're trying to draft a red control deck, you're going to have to prioritize that 2/1 that becomes a 3/2 when you exile it from your graveyard because otherwise you're not getting a good 2-drops. Or maybe you have to prioritize the like discard 2, draw 3, and that gains you 2 life or something like that. There's a lot of cards that you maybe, yeah. Biomathematician is great for this sort of deck. Creates bodies, helps you with fractal themes. 1 times, what's it called? Biomathematician. Mathematician, there we go. Containment Breach is more of a sideboard card. Divide by 0 is fine, but we'll put them sideboard. We'll say you can get a Field Trip because that's a good card for the deck. I like this school too so far. Frost Trickster is just going to be a good card. It's nice for stalling your opponent, but it's much better in an aggressive deck. So if there's a blue-red tempo deck, it's going to be much better here. There could also be a blue-green tempo deck because if we're looking at the cards that we have as our 2-drops, there's also just like, it's also just totally fine to try and beat down with your Scurrid Colonies and your Reckless Amplimancers and your 2-drops. The 2-drops also fit decently in a beat down plan. Biomathematician's fine for beating down. Golden Ratio. So what are the different powers among creatures? That's going to be harder to determine initially, but there's some mix of 1 and 2 power on the 2-drops, which is nice and a good sign for Golden Ratio. Kelpie Guide. Let's just say you can get one of those. We'll add that in. It's a good card. It's going to be good for the blue-red decks too to help ramp you, so it's going to be a high priority because it helps you ramp in a blue-red deck that maybe doesn't get ramp. Maybe you'd play Letter of Acceptance, maybe not. Mage Duel is going to be a priority because you don't get access to interaction in this color, so you're going to really need Mage Duels. Mentor's Guidance. Let's see. So let's just look, because ideally you want to be able to cast Mentor's Guidance on turn 3, which means you need to have a Cleric, Druid, Shaman, Warlock, or Wizard in play by that point. So let's look at the 2-drops. So Wizard, so that works. Not a Wizard. Wizard. Druid. Wizard. Not Wizard or Druid. So it's not going to be that easy to get it going. There's like a decent number of Wizards, but not that many at early drops. Pop Quiz could be okay. Quandrix Pledge Mage. See, this is more of a, this isn't really a late game ramp card because it doesn't block super well and it takes some work to get going. But it could be, if there's a tempo, blue-green deck, it could fit there. Similarly, Reflective Golem works really well with Combat Tricks, which this color does have some of. So maybe you combine the Reflective Golem with Charge Through, get an extra card draw, Fortifying Draw, get an extra couple life. Golem could work well in that. Solve the Equation's just unplayable. Springmane Servant gains you some life, so maybe you want that. Maybe you also want a Vortex Runner. Eureka Moment could be good for ramping. Master Symmetrist is just a good card. So is Professor of Zoomancy. Quandrix Cultivator is also a good card. It is an uncommon, but we'll add a Zoomancy. We'll add the Cultivator. It's easier to get the cards that are both your colors because other decks can't take them as much. Aerialist is good for a more aggressive version. Ether Helix, which is a good card as well. Burying Books. Burying Books is going to be pretty important for interaction. There's just not a ton of good interaction in this color combo. Karok Wrangler is good for the more the XY hybrid cards. Yeah, they are pretty splashable, like splashing blue. But yeah, I know what you're saying, Mayday. Yeah. Karok Wrangler, 5-mana 3/3, but it's good with the more prowessy cards, but we're building the more ramp version of the deck. Wormhole Serpent could be really good in a ramp version of the deck. It bridges the gap. Not a lot of fractal cards we're seeing. Leyline Invocation, pretty good. We're having just a big fractal. And Bookworm. Let's just add that. This is more of a tempo-y card as well. No day. So let's just see what this looks like. Let's first look at the curve by zooming out. So this is pretty beautiful curve here. You just have a lot of cheap plays, a lot of stuff up the curve. This is looking real nice, just instantly. A lot of stuff just going up the curve. I will say that the pennant, it's like an uncommon Bookworm. Leyline Invocation is the typical one, but look at this curve. Lots of 2-drops, decent number of 3s, and then you just kind of go up like from there. Bookworm's an uncommon. I don't think it's going to see as much play because it only really fits into a big ramp deck. I will also say that Eureka Moment's looking less important. It looks like you're going to be playing a lot of 2-drops or 3-drops that then get better in the late game, like your Zimone gets better, or your Scurrid Colony gets better, or your Reckless Amplimancer gets better because you have the mana for it. So maybe like ramping to the big mana is not as important. It's more of like a side effect. Mage Duel is going to be really important for interaction. This is 23 cards again. Maybe playing 18 lands if you really want to get up to that many. Leyline Invocation is the big common. It makes like a 6/6 fractal or bigger. Team Pennant's looking a lot worse. There's not as many fractals. Only Leyline Invocation and Biomathematician, which to be fair are both pretty solid. But giving the Biomathematician token counters isn't as good. The Biomathematician's solid, but nothing too special. It looks like there's not a ton of fractal generation. And it looks like you're going to be able to just build a typical good curve deck that then maybe gets to the late game, so maybe you're not going to be playing Bookworm as much. you may just get there on your own. Eureka Moment's a little bit tough to use because you don't necessarily care about ramp. I'll be interested. I'm not going to do it currently because I'm just trying to do one deck skeleton for each color combination. But the more tempo-y version of blue-green that plays like Charge Through and Fortifying Drought, along with Symmetry Sage, Big Play, Burrog Befuddler could fit in that deck. There's a lot of more tempo-y elements to blue-green, I think, than you might initially think based on looking at, oh, it's a big mana deck. Because looking at that curve, there's a lot of good 2-drops and things like that. There's a bounce spell. Frost Trickster is still in there. I didn't put that in because it's not as good in the more rampy version, so you don't prioritize it as much. But it's still a great card, and it's still going to be good in those decks. And then Quandrix Pledge Mage and Reflective Golem. Yeah, I think Burying Books is just good in both versions. I didn't put it in, but I think it's just good in both versions. That's the 3-mana bounce spell. Oh, I was thinking of Divide by 0. What's Burying Books? Burying Books. Burying Books. Huh, I don't see it. But yeah, there's also going to probably be a more tempo-y version that plays the Pledge Mage, the Reflective Golem, works well with Mage Duel by casting 2 spells in a turn, potentially just ups the pressure by playing more aggressive 2-drops and like the 2-mana 2/2s of the world. Oh, Burying Books, I know what you're saying. Yeah. The 5-mana one that can be 3 mana. The discount's only for if they're attacking you, though, so it's more better in the defensive decks, I think. But yeah, there could be a tempo version here for sure, I'd say. Especially because Charge Through. I think Charge Through is going to be a pretty key card for some versions of the deck. It looks like, based on this version, that there might not be as much top end as you need, though you can probably get the Leyline Invocations because no one else wants them. But it feels like there's going to be support for a tempo build as well. There's not a ton of learn cards that I was really putting into these builds. Like I wasn't like, this is the only real like learn card that I really put in. I don't think you have to really care about the learn cards as much, but yeah, pretty interesting there. Let's look at another color combo here. That was blue-green. It looks like ramp. Like, I just love looking at the curve. The curve is really an important part to me, and the curve just trickles right up. Lots of good 2-drops is really important for a deck, and blue-green has that. So it makes me think it can probably play aggro better than it looks. Also, because blue-green doesn't have good interaction, it might rely on being aggro and using some of its good combat tricks. Because I think both this combat trick and Big Play are both pretty reasonable combat tricks. So, and Crash Through is good for triggering Magecraft and like potentially growing something like your, where is it? Quandrix Pledge Mage, and then you get your Reflective Golem, which works really well with green-blue cards. So I think Reflective Golem could be really good in this deck too. But we will edit this deck and go straight into black-white. I think we'll do that one next, and then we will go into blue-red, and then finish it up with black-green. So, black-white. I think black-white looks like an aggressive deck. That was my impression based on looking at the cards initially, and it has +1/+1 counters theme. I still am not a fan of Clever Lumimancer, just because I think that card's going to be really hard to trigger consistently. And if you don't have it on turn 1, it's a blank a lot of the time, which I don't love. It's tough to curve out while also casting instants and sorceries. That's what I'll say. Eye Twitch could be a card that this deck wants. It's a fine place to put counters, and it dies into a card, but it's not super high impact right off the bat. Your opponent isn't necessarily going to have to attack into it, and if you're attacking them, then you're not chump blocking with it. Still probably a card you could play. I'm just not going to put it there. I'm going to put Guiding Voice. I think that's a card that black-white could want that no other deck wants. So when I put the cards on the list, part of it is I try to think of cards you can reasonably get. So I'll put some of the uncommons, but I'll also try to put more of the gold uncommons on the list than the monocolored uncommons, because the monocolored uncommons you're going to be fighting over with other people. Let's say Lash of Malice you can get a copy of. That's a good interaction spell early on. I'm going to skip on Eye Twitch for now because I think the black-green deck is going to prioritize it a little bit higher potentially. Oh, that's a cool pseudonym. Professor's Warning, putting a counter, or Indestructible, that could be reasonable as well. So there's a couple of cards to put counters on. Star Pupil could be a really good card in the deck. So we'll start off with that. Hi, Gaelon. Stonebinder's familiar. Not really a card that you can trigger as much in this deck, I don't think. Still. Unwilling Ingredient seems like much better in a black-green deck where you can sacrifice it to your Biograph or to some other sacrifice effect. It also wears counters decently. Maybe I should put either Unwilling Ingredient or Eye Twitch onto this list as just another 1-drop for an aggressive deck. We'll put it there for now. Maybe we'll move it off later. This seems like a deck that could want Zephyr Boots, though the Inklings already have flying, so Team Pennant could go well there as well. Let's just add Team Pennant. Arrogant Poet seems nice. Maybe Zephyr Boots are fine too. Let's add Zephyr Boots just so we can keep that in mind. 1 times Arrogant Poet. I like that card in the aggressive deck. Beaming Defiance seems like it could fit well also, but it's probably worse than Professor's Warning. Yeah, it could be a pretty good pressure Zero Turbo. That's why I put it on the list for sure. Beaming Defiance. So this is another deck where you don't really want the Ageless Guardian, so even though it's technically a 2-drop you could play, you don't want to put it on the list. That's why looking at the red-white control deck was interesting, because I thought about the red-white control deck. I was like, oh, it'd be so cool. How good is red-white control? But then you kind of only get the payoffs if you have the Quintorius in play. Seems there's a lot of combat tricks. It always seems like there's a lot of combat tricks Mayday, but then you kind of quickly narrow down to a situation where a lot of the combat tricks just prove to be unplayable or just bad enough that you don't come up against them very often. Eager First Year seems like a great 2-drop for this deck. It's just a 2/2 that can then grow later on. I mean, grow to like trade up with a 3/2 or something when you're attacking. It's also going to be good in the red-white aggro decks. Essence Infusion is not a card I'm a huge fan of. There's not a ton of bounce or enchantment removal. A lot of the removal is damage-based or fight spell-based. So buffing up a creature +2/+2 could be good. But I'm still wary because there's like, especially in black, there's just kill spells. In white, there's Expel. Flunk is a removal spell. I think you'll play it, but it's not like a high priority, so we'll just assume you don't have it. Humiliate. I don't think you're going to really prioritize this if you're being an aggro deck, though putting a counter is nice. It's just you don't really want to be doing this on turn 2. Hunt for Specimens. You don't really want to make a 1/1, even though it does learn. It is still okay, but it's not really exactly what you want to do. Let's just put a Killian Ink Duelist in there. Like, it seems like okay to make a 1/1 and maybe draw a card that's reasonable, but it's going to depend on what you have. Leech Fanatic. There's looking, again, after I get past the 2-drops, I'll do that little quick check in here. Plumb the Forbidden could be okay, but it seems like more of a Golgari card when you have the pests in play. What are the cards I'm going to put multiples of? So far I haven't been really doing multiples because it doesn't really display as well on the website I'm looking at things on. But I'll show you some examples after I get past these 2-drops. I'll just go right now. I'm just going to finish going through the 2-drops first, and then I'll look at it. Professor Symbology, sure, let's just say you can get one of those. Symbology, Show of Confidence. Could be okay if there's other counters cards that are cheap to play. So maybe in combat you go like Combat Trick, Show of Confidence, put 2 counters on 2 different things. Maybe it's okay. It's only going to be good in this sort of deck, really. Silver Quill Apprentice. I like that one in this deck. And it's an uncommon, but we'll just say you can get some of these. Stone Rice Spirit, not as good because it's just small. I don't love it as an aggressive option, and you don't have spirit buffers in this color combo as much. Study Break could be okay. Thunderous Orator. Let's put a study break in here. Okay, so let's save changes and then look at the 2-drops that we have access to. Eager first year. What is there a hyphen in there? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. This is pretty good software. I'm pretty impressed. Not gonna lie, I've never used it before in my life, but it's pretty good. Okay, so looking at this, there's a lot of cheap plays that you can play. There's a lot of good stuff to play early on. Star Pupil and Unwilling Ingredient could both be good places to load up counters. And then you have Arrogant Poet, Eager First Year as Leech Fanatic as good commons for the 2-drops. So there's 3 good common 2-drops. Probably can get multiples of those. So this is the sort of card where I'd be like, well, you can probably get 2 of those. You can probably get 2 of these. You can probably get 1 of those. So you can get the 2-drops relatively, and you can probably get an uncommon one. So it's probably easy to get there on 2-drops. But since it doesn't really change the way the thing looks, I'm just going to keep it at 1 for now. The 1/1 flyer, yeah, Eye Twitch is a 1-drop. I didn't want to put just literally every card you could potentially play, especially some of the uncommons that are monocolored. I'm trying to build like a relatively typical deck potentially. There's already 3 combat tricks: Beaming Defiance, Professor's Warning. I guess no, there's not a 3rd combat trick that we've seen so far. So let's look back up at this card for a second. The Essence Infusion. So Essence Infusion on the early stages of the game could really take over. If you put Essence Infusion onto a Star Pupil, there's a few cards that could kill it right away, mostly out of red. So it might be a situation, and same with Unwilling Ingredient, it might be a situation where you sideboard in Essence Infusion against decks where they won't then be able to kill your creature. So if they're a deck that's relying on Lash of Malice to kill your early creature or something like that, maybe it gets a little bit easier to use, but I still don't love the card. So looking at a lot of good 2-drops here, and there's some Magecraft stuff that cares about buffing your creatures up. So that means that Professor's Warning could be much better than it looks. Because if Professor's Warning is put a counter on a creature, your Eager Student gets +1/+0, and your other guy gets +1/+0, that could be a little bit better. What's this card do again? Where is he? Silver Quill Apprentice. No. Killian Ink Duelist. Cast it, target a creature, cost 2 less to cast. So you can cast removal spells for cheaper and interaction for cheaper. Okay. And Study Break could be good in this sort of aggro deck. I could see this is maybe not a brackish Trudge deck. There's not as much life gain. Expanded Anatomy could be a card that you want access to, because putting the counters onto a perp pupil or something could be useful. So we'll add one of those just so we can look. Or onto one of the like flyers or something. Not really an Expel deck. That's why I thought the red-white deck might benefit, because it gets access to Expel. Go Blank, not really an aggressive card. Inkling Summoning is a card you'll want, though. Just a good learn card. Necrotic Fumes, maybe not as good. Pilgrim of Ages is more of a controlling card, because it's more based on having like needing the land drops and being able to return itself. Promising Duskmage could be great. If you have some other counter stuff. Golem can be good in this sort of deck when you put 2 counters on your creature. Shadewing Laureate. So what other flyers are there? I like to think of what you can curve into it. At the 2-drop slot, there's Arrogant Poet as a flyer, and that's it, kind of. The Inklings are flyers. But look, again, we haven't seen a ton of things that make Inklings. Like, I think we've added every Inkling maker to the list, and there's only 1 so far. This thing's also maybe a flyer. Silver Quill Pledge Mage. Okay, so it's definitely looking like Black-White's going to be an aggressive deck. Umbral Juke. That's going to be a good card for any deck, though, so you maybe can't get that. Juke does make an Inkling, though. Biblioplex Assistant makes a flyer. Combat Professor is going to be great in this deck. Love this card, and it's great in this deck. Disappointment's not as good because you don't really want to... I mean, you do care about the 2 damage to each player. I think that's probably beneficial for you. But... I don't think you really want this in your aggro deck. Dueling Coach maybe is a card that you could play, though. We'll have to see. We'll put it in and think about how many cards have counters running around on them. Elocution. 2 counters on a creature, others get +1/+1. That's just not good. 4/4 mana at sorcery speed. Mage Hunter's okay. 1 times Mage Hunter's Onslaught, that'll be good. Because you want to be attacking, so you can kill their creature, attack all, maybe force some chumps. Novice Dissector. The fact that it's only sorcery speed makes it a lot worse. Spectre's pretty solid. We'll put a Spiteful Squad into the deck. We can assume you can get one of those. Maybe Spectre of the Fens as another flyer for the other card. 4 mana 2/3 flyers tend to overperform in my opinion, from what I've seen. So you probably don't need to prioritize it at all. Closing Statement, we'll put one of those in because we'll just assume you're lucky. Because that card's great. We'll also put in a copy of Owlin Shield Mage. That card's also great. Hard to target, deals 3 damage pretty much no matter what. Tenured Inkcaster. We'll have to see how many counters are running around. Maybe you'll want the Pillar Drop Rescuer and then Rise of X, just maybe 1 copy at the top end. So let's look at this. It's looking like black-white is going to be pretty good too. Like based on the first assessment, let's look at the curve here. Again, pretty nice curve. You like seeing this shape generally slanting down. I think I was more ambitious adding some of these cards. But there's a lot of good 1-drops potentially too. There's 28 cards in here. So let's just say, okay, so which cards care about counters? There's the Tenured Inkcaster. There is Dusk Mage that cares about counters. There is Star Pupil that cares about counters. Maybe you would want the 4 mana card that can sack a creature so you can distribute the counters where they are best used. Spiteful Squad cares about counters. Dueling Coach cares about counters. So there's a decent counter sub-theme. So I think Guiding Voice could actually be a card that you want in this deck, because if you have 1 copy of your Inkling Summoning to go get or Expanded Anatomy, it could do a lot of good work. So I think those 2 cards are going to be ones you get a decent amount with this. So Guiding Voice seems actually pretty good. And Professor's Warning seems pretty good, because if you win a combat by putting a counter on a creature, maybe because you're also triggering Magecraft or something like that, it could be pretty nice. Looking at the evasion, it looks like there's already a decent amount of evasion, so maybe you don't need to prioritize Zephyr Boots. I don't think we're really trying to go for the early play 1-drop attack type thing. Yeah, Make Your Mark could also be pretty good. Zero Turbo, good point, good point. As a cheap way to trigger Magecraft and trade up. Unwilling Ingredient seems okay, but it's not like you're going to be layering counters on anything. There's not a ton of token making. Study Break could also be a fine option if you do have 1 copy of the Inkling Summoning to go get. I don't think you're really going to want to rely on Beaming Defiance. You'd rather get Professor's Warning because you can get a counter then. And some of the slots are going to be taken by like Guiding Voice or things like that. There are some nice Magecraft themes though, so like Study Break, give your thing flying, or Lifelink. Inkcaster actually seems pretty decent as a top end card if you have the right deck for it. Pillar Drop Rescuer seems like it can get back some good stuff, but maybe not a key card for the deck. It's more of a aggro card, but yeah. I was a little bit worried about this deck before I did this, but I think that there's actually enough stuff that cares about counters, and the counters cards are generally attached to reasonable enough effects that I think you can play them. I think getting an Inkling Summoning is going to be really important so that you can afford to play a Guiding Voice and actually getting a reasonable card out of it. Because then it essentially just becomes a cantripping, put a counter on your creature because the 3-mana 2/1's decent. And being able to target your counters onto Dusk Mage, it might be tricky to do, but it could definitely be worth it. Because imagine you play Tenured Inkcaster, put the counter on the Dusk Mage, you now have a 3/4, you attack them, drain them, hit them for 3. If they do kill it, you get a draw card. I think with Inkcaster, you're going to want to put the counter on something else in the vast majority of cases, because then if they kill the Inkcaster, you don't lose both effects at once. You only lose the creature. I like Spiteful Squad a lot. It's going to be a good attacker, good blocker, works well with the Inkcaster, and dies into good stuff. Combat Professor should be pretty good, but maybe not as good because it doesn't put counters, but still pretty good. Dueling Coach could be good in the right build. A lot of good 2-drops again if we zoom out for the curve. We get to see that the curve is actually looking pretty sweet. Though 2 of the 3-drops are these things, but 3-drops are generally not a priority. You can generally get 3-drops when you need them. But decent number of good 2-drops. Yeah, pretty cool deck. I like the look of it. Let's move on. I'll zoom back in because we are way too small here. Okay. Keep in mind, I am missing out on some of the hybrid cards that you could be playing, like cards that are like black, like red, white, gold hybrids, because I just think it keeps things simpler to look at the cards, and then those ones just get cut out because of the way I sort, but it's still going to be okay. And now we're going to look at Prismari. Main deck, Show of Confidence. Is that the one that puts 2 counters onto a creature? I don't think I would. So blue-red, again sorted by converted mana cost. The 2 mana that copies itself. Oh, I think you could play it. You could justify playing it in certain builds, but you want to have enough other instants so that you can use this as put 2 counters on different things at instant speed mid-combat to really blow them out. But I could justify playing that, I think, in some builds. Okay, so we're just going to do this so that when I finally do the last colors, it works out. Okay. Blue-red. So there's different builds. There's a tempo blue-red build, I think, and there's a controlling blue-red build. We just looked at an aggro build. We looked at the more aggro. I think it's probably going to be best as a, I don't know, probably as an aggro deck, because aggro tempo decks are really good and limited a lot of the time, but building a control deck is interesting too. It's interesting to see which deck skeleton I should use for it, but I think I'll probably use the deck skeleton for the controlling version, because that's something that I when I was first looking through the cards, I was thinking, oh, Prismari control, that could be a really good thing. But it could also just be a really totally reasonable tempo, like good tempo deck and stuff. But we're just gonna assume that you're trying to build a controlling deck, so you're not really using Symmetry Sage. Arcane Subtraction is a little bit better in tempo-y decks. So maybe you play Expressive Iteration. It's like a draw 2 cards if you're trying to get lands. Illustrious Historian's a good card for this type of deck. So you have some competition for him. Prismari Apprentice is more of a beatdown card because it gets unblockable, but it can still grow. We'll just put a Pledge Mage, though. That's a really good card. I like Prismari Pledge Mage. Just good tool. Could also be good in the, I guess you can't really cast it as easily in lower hold control. A Soothsayer Adept. Could be fine. If I'm just trying to look through if there was cards that are good for a more beatdown version. I guess Befuddler. Teach by Example is interesting. I don't know how good it is. It feels like it's tough to use, but it does trigger your Magecraft stuff. but I'm just going to start by saying no. Spell Satchel. Whenever you cast an instant, put a book counter on it. So it can help you cast your big stuff, but it does mean taking a turn off, and it doesn't always work, so I don't like it, really. I don't think I'm going to be playing that card very much. Divide by 0 is pretty nice for this type of deck. Frost Trickster, again, is more for a tempo-y deck. I think there will be a tempo blue-green deck, and there will be a tempo blue-red deck, but I'm just not looking at those. Currently, I'm trying to... Because, like, when you're drafting, you want to be building towards something. You don't just want to draft random good cards a lot of the time, because then... Like, some decks, if you get your opponent to 10 life, it doesn't matter. Like, they could start the game at 10 life, and you wouldn't be able to kill them until the late game anyway. Whoa!
Thanks for the insights.
Oh, I appreciate the support, 30-pound Knight. Thank you. 3 months. It's a pretty long time, and thanks for sharing that Twitch Prime. Grinning Ignis could be good in this deck. I think this is the only deck that would want Grinning Ignis, because it can help you cast your big stuff a little earlier. We'll just say you can get a Heated Debate, and that maybe you can get an Igneous Inspiration, even though every red deck is going to want those. Kelpie Guide is good, but we'll just say you don't get that or something like that. Pop Quiz could be a card that you end up playing. This version of the deck isn't as good with Reflective Golem, I don't think. There are a lot of wizards in this one. I think, at least. Wizard, Shaman. So pretty much all of your 2-drops would be wizards. So Mentor's Guidance could fit well in this deck. It is a copy effect, but I don't think we need to really put it in, but it's still pretty reasonable. Rutha, Mercurial Artist. Could be nice. I think Spectacle Mage is going to be really important. I think if you have a lot of Spectacle Mages, your deck is going to be really good. Because if you get multiple of these into play and you can cast your 7-drops for 5, that's huge. Especially because there's a lot of 8-drops that are really powerful. Tome Shredder could be decent. Vortex Runner could be decent. Maelstrom Muse is huge. Really good card for this type of deck. Pillar Drop Warden could be nice too. It isn't the greatest card because the 4-mana 1/5 is just not great, but it can have some usefulness. I don't love Serpentine Curve. I think Stormkiln Artist is nice, but 4-mana 2/2s are so fragile that I don't have confidence in how good it's going to be. Ardent Dust Speaker is also a great card. Pretty much any red or white deck is going to want this, I think. I mean, red-white deck or blue-red deck is going to want it. Burying Books is also good for a controlling version because you'll cast it for the discount. Elemental Summoning will add that. I'll just add the Dust Speaker, but I guess it's worse in this type of deck where you have a lot of expensive cards. It's much better in the tempo-y version because you'll have cheaper cards to cast off it. If you flip a couple of expensive cards, you're not going to be able to cast them necessarily. I like the Ogier Battle Seer probably fine as a 5-drop. Pigment Storm, still good. Ogier Battle Seer. 2 G's in Ogier, of course, as we all know from the traditional Greek spelling. I'm pretty proud of that joke. It was low-hanging fruit, but I like it. The traditional Greek spelling of Ogier. Okay, Practical Research is a card you'll want. When I'm adding cards to this list, it might seem fairly random which cards I choose to add from the uncommons. To a certain degree it is. I'm like, okay, you can't get access to every uncommon, but these are some of the ones you might be able to get, or I'll add some of them so you can get a general idea. And I'm more often going to add the gold ones to the list because you're not competing for them with as many people. Probably not Wormhole Serpent for this deck. Snow Day could be okay for a more, especially as a top end for a tempo deck. Creative Outburst, definitely a card you'll want. Elemental Masterpiece. And then Explosive Welcome. We'll just put all of these. There are a lot of uncommons that I've added to the list, but I think it could be reasonable to get some of these. And instead of adding like multiple copies of the commons, I'm just adding variety. Okay. So this is the curve here. So not a ton of 2-drops that are great for the defensive version. There are 3 2-drops, and you're really good. They're all commons, though. I think you're really going to want these Prismari Pledge Mages. Decent number of 3-drops, but Spectacle Mage is the real key component. But I think both of these are also key components for the aggro versions of the deck, because you can still use your Spectacle Mage to just cast Pigment Storm. So these are just great cards for either version, which is actually a good thing, because if you're drafting Prismari, it gives you flexibility to build into either version. And then top end cards, some of these cards are not things you're going to want in a more aggressive version. Like you're going to want, I feel like there might be more, it's just be a mid-range deck, but it looks like the 2-drops are really a spot where it lacks a little bit of depth in terms, there's only like 3 that you kind of want. Grinning Ignis is not a card I'm going to zoom back in, by the way, so people understand what I'm talking about. Grinning Ignis is a card that you're not going to want in a more aggressive version. Maelstrom Muse is good in an aggressive version. There's a lot of cards that are just good in both types of decks. So if I had to just cut some of the cards that I think you wouldn't want, like this card dealing 5 to the opponent and then just getting a card into your hand is nice, but you're not going to be able to reliably cast a 7-drop in your aggro deck, so you're probably not going to run this in your aggro deck. You might run 1 copy of Elemental Masterpiece, but still you probably aren't going to run that. Explosive Welcome, again, not a really aggressive tempo-y card. But similarly, you're not going to really want Practical Research in the more aggressive version. So like one of the things that I like about that controlling version is you gain access to those top end cards that the other version of blue-red isn't going to want. So similarly, you can probably get the pop quizzes late because the other deck doesn't want them, I don't think. So like if there is 2 different versions of Prismari, which is relatively likely, just as there's relatively likely to be 2 versions of blue green, or Quandrix as they say, or 2 versions of red white. I'm not sure if there's going to be 2 versions of black white. Black white seems pretty focused on being aggro, unless you have like a rare that incentivizes you to go control, which there are rares that do that, I think. But mostly you're going to be more aggro, I think. But in these colleges where there are 2 different things you can do, it's important to look for overlap in the cards that the decks are going to want. So every Prismari deck is going to want Spectacle Mage, I'm pretty sure. Every Prismari deck is going to want the Pledge Mage, because an aggressive deck can use it to attack, a defensive deck can use it to defend. Maelstrom Muse as a 4-mana 2/4 flyer is just a fine body in an aggressive deck that's going to make your removal spell cost less, but it's like super good if you're using it to make your 7-drop cost 2 less, because then you're just jamming it in, because this is just a really good card for that type of deck. But then there's those like cards that we just cut, those expensive ones, the Welcome, the Masterpiece, the Outburst, the Practical Research, that the more controlling deck gains access to. Even though only one of those is a common, you can still gain access to these sorts of cards, and the other deck doesn't really want them. So if you're building a controlling Prismari deck, and there's someone building an aggressive Prismari deck, there are certain cards that you are going to have different interests in. Similarly, Dust Speaker is a card that gets a lot better in the more aggressive version of the deck, where you have a better likelihood of flipping up a couple of 3-drops that you can then cast. So on turn 5, you cast Dust Speaker. Turn 6, you play your land, and then you can flip up a couple of 3-drops. You're more likely to do that if you're playing a more aggressive version of the deck. Stormkiln Artist is probably good in the more controlling version. I just didn't add it. Waterfall Aerialist. It doesn't block any better than other cards, really. It's only got 1 toughness, but it's really good in an aggressive version of the deck. So your 4-drop slot, instead of being filled with a Pillar Drop Warden, all of a sudden you get a 3/1 flyer. So I'm not going to do a full deck breakdown. I've been trying to do 1 per color so that I don't get too off track, or so that I can make sure I get through all of the color pairs and the colleges. But it's important to remember that some of these cards, like Grinning Ignis, you don't care about in your more aggressive version. Pillar Drop Warden, you don't care about in your more aggressive version. But that there will be cards that you don't really care about this as much in your aggressive version. But then there's other cards that you start to care about more. So you'll gain access to the 3/1 more often because you'll prioritize it more. All of a sudden, your copies of Burog Befuddler go up in value. Your copies of, where is the 2/2 flyer? That is awesome. Frost Trickster. Frost Trickster is a great card. I think this is probably just the best blue common, and it's hard to necessarily find a home where it is at its best. It's going to be good in every blue deck that you have, just because even in a defensive blue deck, you're going to be tapping their creature down and buying yourself an extra turn if you're building these more controlling decks. But in the aggressive deck where you shut down one of their blockers for 2 turns, it's going to be an absolute beast. Imagine going Frost Trickster into Frost Trickster. All of a sudden, they have 2 blockers tapped down for that 1 turn, and you're just crushing them. Like turn 3 Frost Trickster, turn 4 Frost Trickster. They're just never, and you're just attacking them with your 2 mana 2/2 on the ground. You're just punishing them incredibly hard, especially if they're not curving out or if they're doing something that's not affecting the board. So these Frost Trickster is really good, but it's maximized in a tempo-y deck. So the blue-green deck that might exist, or probably does exist, or the blue-red aggro deck that exists. These are things to be aware of, that they're a little bit different in what they're going to prioritize. And like Prismari Apprentice is a card you gain access to in the aggressive deck that you don't really care about in the defensive deck. And just always keep those things in mind. You might play Symmetry Sage. The Academic Dispute could also go up in value if you just need cheap spells for Magecraft or things like that. I don't know. I'm pretty excited to try building these decks because it's going to be interesting seeing how they go. Mentor's Guidance could be go really well in the aggressive version where you can double trigger Magecraft for some of your cards. Seems like it's going to be interesting. Like, I guess it doesn't give double unblockable. I was trying to think of a card where double triggering was really good, but there are some like that, I think. But yeah, definitely an interesting deck, and I did cut some of the cards from it, but definitely seems good. The 2-drop slot is a little bit more weaker for the controlling version. The more aggressive version does gain access to some extra cards. It gains access to Befuddler. The general is just to find 2 mana 2/2. 2 mana 2/2s are better in attacking decks than controlling decks because you just need a critical mass of 2-drops. This card, you gain access to that guy. You probably lose the Soothsayer, but you don't really want that. But you'll be able to play Sudden Breakthrough as a combat trick in your aggressive version. You'll be able to play Frost Trickster fully maximized. So yeah, I think the control version and the aggressive version have potential there. So now we're on to the final school, which is Witherbloom, which is green-black. I will say right off the bat that the 6 mana hybrid removal spell that we looked at earlier, the white-black hybrid one, is a card that your deck could potentially want to play in this one because it is just a removal spell. But the first thing I'm going to think about with this deck is there is a life gain theme and there is a pest tokens theme, and they all just kind of fit into a grindy deck, I'm pretty sure. There is no recursion at common where you can bring back 2 creatures. I don't think there even is one at uncommon, but I guess we'll see. I don't remember it from when I was looking at the cards, but again, the 6 mana removal spell feels like a solely Witherbloom card to you. I think you could play it in your Lorehold control decks. I think black-white might sometimes sneak it in there if they just need an unconditional removal spell, or if they're more mid-rangey. Because you can definitely build more mid-rangey black-white decks as well, where 6 mana, kill a creature, draw a card, which is essentially what that is still great. But yeah, so we're going to add Eye Twitch here. I think you're going to want to prioritize Eye Twitch, because I think this is the best deck for the Groff. So we're going to add Eye Twitch. Going to add Lash of Malice. We're going to add Fortifying Drought. I think it's an uncommon combat trick, but the gaining 2 life, it could be relevant. We're going to add Unwilling Ingredient. This could be a good deck for Zephyr Boots, because looting is nice. Maybe not Arrogant Poet, because it's more mid-range, but Bayou Groff for sure. This is a good deck for... This card's not good, I don't think. Big Play could be good in this deck. I think turn 2 Groff is going to happen less often than you think. Sure, people will go for it, but how many 1-drops can you put in your deck? How many Groffs can you draft? Deadly Brew. Each player sacks a creature. I think Deadly Brew could be good in this sort of deck if you have pests, so we'll put that in for now. Big Play could be good, especially in a blue-green tempo deck. Maybe not in a green-black grindy deck. Devouring Tendrils. Definitely a reasonable removal spell. Dina Soul Steeper. Sure, we'll add the random legendary. When you gain life, they lose life. You can sack a creature to give it bonus power. Neat. Soul Steeper. She's like drinking her tea. That's funny. Sequence, fine card as well. Infusion if you need life, it's okay. Hunt for Specimens is probably going to be good in this deck, I'd say. This is like the best home for it, especially if you can go get another card that makes more of the pest tokens. Infuse is reasonable. Leech Fanatic is reasonable. We'll put Overgrown Arch in here, because you are going to really be prioritizing the Overgrown Arch type effects where you can repeatedly gain life if you have something like the Dina. Thank you so much, Mateus Floyd, for the subscription. Thanks for sharing that Twitch Prime. I really do appreciate it. Plum the Forbidden could be good. Thank you so much, Mateus. You can sacrifice one or more creatures when you do copy this spell for each creature. So it's like a worse Village Rites by a lot. Village Rites is pay 1, sack a creature, draw 2. This is, I guess you draw a card and lose 1 life without sacrificing anything. So it's like 2 mana for a Village Rites effect if you sacrifice 1 creature. But you can sacrifice more things. I don't think it's very good. I guess copying it could be nice if you have some Magecraft stuff, but I'm going to start off by avoiding it in the deck skeleton. Amplimancer's fine. Scurrid Colony's fine. We'll only pick one of them to put in. We'll just put in the Amplimancer, though. You just need 2 drops. But you're not going to really be prioritizing ramp as much, so you might not want the Scurrid Colony. Spell Satchel does not seem great. Witherbloom Apprentice seems great. Blood Researcher also seems great. I don't like Tend the Pest, so I'm going to put the Apprentice in here, though. It's hard to realize how like these types of things add up. Like just draining them for 3 over the course of the game is just really kind of deadly. Blood Research is great. Brackish Trudge is a really nice recursive threat for this sort of deck, and I don't think that the black-white deck can really use it very well. So another little bonus you get. Field Trip, I don't think you're really a Field Trip deck. Honor Troll gets very good in the deck. Yeah, but sacrificing multiple creatures is not necessarily where you want to be, Zeratul, bro. Because in the games where you don't draw all of your pest generators, you kind of end up in a bad spot. Like, sacrifice 3 creatures, draw 4 cards would not be great. Mage Duel could still be good. I am adding a lot of uncommons here, but, you know, pest summoning is key. I think pest summoning is really good. It's like the best thing you could be doing with your turn 2 looking up a card. Also, Necrotic Themes could be pretty nice too. Dusk Mage isn't really as good in this deck. Golem probably still has some stuff it can do. Golem just seems like it has okay stuff in a lot of colors, but maybe not in this one. Infused with Vitality, getting that to work would be kind of cute, but yeah. Servant actually seems really good when you need to trigger life gain. Okay. Umbral Juke. You're going to be fighting for this card with the other black-white deck. I'll just leave it out for now. Each player loses a life and you draw 2 cards. Probably worse for you because you're a more grindy deck, but you still need the card draw maybe. I don't know. The Daemogoth Woe Eater. It's going to be a card you play, but I don't think I'm going to put it in here. Similarly, Mage Hunters. Like, this is a card that black-green can gain access to, but I'm not going to put in every black-green uncommon. Mage Hunter's Onslaught. Master Symmetrist, again, you're going to be fighting for that. Moldering Karak is okay. Moldering Mortality Spear is excellent. You might be fighting for this card with blue-green, though, because blue-green might try to splash this. But this still is really good. Novice Dissector could actually be really good in this deck, because you can like gain life whenever you want by sacrificing your... I'm going to put it in. Because you can sacrifice your pests to gain the life on command, and then you can also put counters on things, which is nice. Professor of Zoomancy. Professor's really good. the Zoomancy guy. Karok, 4 mana, 3/3 lifelink. Trample. The trample doesn't matter as much to me. It doesn't seem that good to me, though the lifelink could be really relevant, so we'll have to see. It does wear counters incredibly well, so we'll have to keep that in mind. The Karok. I'll add it, I guess. You could definitely play it. 4 mana, 3/3 lifelink isn't the worst, and the fact that there's counters in black could be a pretty big game. This is more the tempo card, as I said. Spectre of the Fens is fine as well. Witherbloom Pledmage is great, too. If there is a blue-green tempo deck, Witherbloom Pledmage is going to be a card that you play in it. As I was saying, like... Oh, this is a gain life. I thought it was a drain. Still, gaining life from your spells on a 5 mana 5/5 is still going to be pretty reasonable. Then maybe you play Bookworm, but I'll probably top the curve off at this guy. Maybe you're more interested in the Annihilation one. There's not as many top-end cards as you maybe would need for a black-green deck. Maybe I'll add Crushing Disappointment because you just need it to help get some card advantage. There isn't a bring back 2 creatures from the graveyard, so you need some card advantage. Maybe you'll play the Invocation. Looks like there's not a lot of grindy elements, so maybe you will play Bookworm. But getting up to 8 mana could be tough. Let's save the changes and see what we're looking at here. Black-green, it's funny because a lot of people that I talked to were like, black-green immediately looked really good to them. But for me, black-green seemed a little fragmented at my first glance. And looking through the deck thing, it seems a little fragmented still. Because the problem is I don't know how you punch through necessarily. So like some decks, you just go bigger than them. Like if you're playing one of those blue-red control decks, you just cast some massive 7-drop and you just make 2 4/4s and the game's just like massively changed. With black-green, like I'm not exactly sure how you get there. I think you might have to build black-green as an aggro deck as well that tries to beat like the blue-red control deck or something, or the blue-green ramp deck. Because blue-green ramp has a lot of stuff for when it gets to 8 mana. Their stuff just gets super powered. Your stuff gets like pest summoning. You just make a bunch of 1/1s, you gain some life. You try to get Deadly Brew to work. You try to go Unwilling Ingredient into Bayou Groff or something like that. But the curve does not keep going. There's no like great 6-drop for the deck. Or you could play Leyline Invocation as a big card. But it feels like there's a little bit of pest stuff. There's a little bit of life gain synergy. Feels like you're going to be nickel and diming your opponent out with these like middle of the pack cards, and then your opponent just drops a hammer on you and you could just get crushed. So we'll have to see how that plays out. There's definitely the Bayou Groff plan where you get like 3 Bayou Groffs and then play 3 Unwilling Ingredients and go turn 1, turn 2. Try to get in 15 damage that way and then drain them out with your Dina Soul Steeper or something. Blood Researcher could be another one. Whenever you gain life, put a counter on Blood Researcher. I think that Blood Researcher could play really well with Novice Dissector because you need to be able to sacrifice those pests that you're generating. And so having a sacrifice outlet that can also turn your pests into a counter and another counter on your Blood Researcher, that's a combo that I'm noticing. Like this Dissector, I thought it would be a black-white card. And I think when you first look at it, you're like, oh, counters. That's a black-white effect in this set. But when you actually look at what colors have extra things to sacrifice and which decks also kind of care about counters to push through damage. If you're going to try to be playing these Hunt for Specimens and Pest Summonings, having Dissector to turn those into counters when those 1/1s aren't really relevant could be really nice. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of grindy elements. There's the Crushing Disappointment's a 2-for-1, but a lot of these cards are just 1-for-1s, and you're just going to get obliterated by some blue mage that plays a card draw spell, which worries me about black-green. But I think I'm not saying black-green's not powerful. I think black-green does have some great stuff going on. Like the turn 2 Bayou Groff play is going to be really legit, especially when you're getting your card back from these 1-drop fodder creatures, which is nice. There's great removal. Lash of Malice. The Mage Hunter's Onslaught at common, and there's also some great removal in black at uncommon. Like the, what's it called? Mortality Spear or whatever. You can also end the game with a Spectre of the Fens draining activation a lot of the time, but I feel sometimes maybe. But it feels like you're going to have to make sure that your deck has some aggressive elements to it, because if you give the other decks too much time to set up, you could get completely hammered. It also could just be a situation where black-green plays the role of slightly bigger than aggro, where it just has a little bit of life gain, a little bit bigger creatures than something like black-white, and then just goes just over the top of them by having like slightly bigger things at each point in the curve, slightly better control elements, and then black-white just like gets a little bit brick-walled. And you just kill all their key threats and just kind of win from there. That could be another black-green strategy as well, because there is a lot of good removal in this color combo. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of potential here. All of the colors have looked pretty cool. I'm glad that I did this exercise. I think it's definitely pretty neat to look at them. Definitely some interesting things came out. The fact that you can't really draft a red-white control deck without Quintorius, or it feels like that's going to be really tough to do, is definitely pretty interesting to me. It feels like that's like your only really good late game engine. The 4 mana like return all the cards didn't maybe get there as well. I will say this program performed really well. I'm not sponsored by Archetype. I've never used it before in my life until today. I was just like looking for a way that I could show the card images while I was building these deck things, and I found it, and it really lived up to kind of what I was looking for in this sort of program. So it is kind of annoying that you can't just click on the card that you want to look at. It drags around, which is a little bit tough, but overall, this program performed really well. So pretty neat. But yeah, that is going to do it for this video. If you were watching this on YouTube and you made it all the way till the end, in the comment section down below, leave hashtag analysis complete. I don't know, because you made it all the way to the end. You saw all of my analysis on the deck skeletons. So leave hashtag analysis complete to let me know you made it all the way to the end of the video. Remember to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment section in the comment section down below with your questions, thoughts, feedback, any of the archetypes you think I maybe misevaluated, what you think about the archetypes that I maybe didn't cover in the archetypes that I did look at, or the ones about the tempo decks for blue-red and blue-green, or maybe the aggro version of red-white if you do your own deck skeletons at home and you come with some conclusions. Be sure to share those in the comments. You can also check out the Twitch stream live at twitch.tv/NicolaiBolas to catch all of the action live. I was just thinking of another hashtag. If you leave hashtag Quintorius the key, because Quintorius is the key to the red-white control deck, maybe. That was just what I was thinking. I was trying to think of a hashtag involving our good friend Quintorius. But yeah, back to the outro. If you do want to get access to my card-by-card grade spreadsheets for the Strixhaven stuff, that is on the Patreon, patreon.com/NicolaiBolas. So when you support my content, you'll gain access to that if you support me at the Patreon tier that for the card grade spreadsheets. So I really do appreciate everyone who does that, and it really does help me continue making these videos, and your support does mean a lot to me, so I appreciate all of you folks who do that. Remember that if you would like to join the NicolaiBolas Discord server, it is free to do so. It is linked in the description and pinned comment. You can also find links to my articles and yeah, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching at home, and it is really awesome to have such a great community to do all this cool analysis for, and I'm very grateful for all of you. That is going to do it for this video, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.